Andy Warhol, along with Picasso, Salvador Dali, and Jackson Pollock, probably the most famous artist of the 20th century, not least of all because of his own efforts at self-promotion. With his fascination with celebrity and with consumer culture, Warhol had his finger on the pulse of his times. He intuited what it all meant, and he told us through his art. In 1967, Leo Castelli's gallery assistant, Ivan Karp, suggested to Warhol that he make a self-portrait. Warhol agreed and created a work that is exclusively about celebrity and public personality because, he explained, quote, pop comes from the outside, unquote. It's an image that tells us nothing about the artist, except what we want to imagine about him. Here's how. It's largely in the pose. At first glance, you may think that it's an expression of thinking, but it's not. To understand the real meaning of his body language, put your fingers in the same pose, with your middle finger up over your lips. Notice that this cancels out the mouth for speaking. Instead, it makes the mouth just for looking at. The hand, the slightly open mouth, the lidded eyes, the blank expression that doesn't really look at us, but instead invites us to look at him. All this comes from Hollywood star publicity photos from the 1930s and 40s, when Warhol grew up. Photos like this one of Greta Garbo, or this one of Rita Hayworth. Essentially, empty vessels ready to be filled with the viewer's fantasies. Notice that at a glance, the pictures of Garbo and Hayworth also have hands that suggest thinking. A hand at the forehead or on the chin. Strategies that Hollywood photographers created to give a tiny bit of false animation to what is otherwise a face that functions like a blank screen for projecting your fantasies on. Here's Warhol, quote, if you want to know all about Andy Warhol, just look at the surface of my paintings and films and me, and there I am. There's nothing behind it, unquote. It's hardly a surprise that Andy emerged first in advertising. He had graduated from Carnegie Tech, now the Carnegie Mellon University, in graphic design in 1949, the year before a friend of my dad started there. He says Warhol already at age 21 had a reputation as someone most likely to succeed. Warhol went to New York and he quickly became one of the major ad designers of the 1950s, fabulously well paid too, by the way. He worked for I. Miller Shoes and made ads like never before. What he understood was that fashion, in the end, isn't about aesthetics at all. It's about the feelings things give you, whether it being cool or hip or sophisticated or trendy or whatever. So it doesn't matter what the fashion item looks like. Warhol created ads for I. Miller Shoes that didn't show the shoes. All along, Warhol had entertained aspirations of making fine art, and in 1960 he finally turned his attention to making it full-time, with comic book images like Dick Tracy, based faithfully on a comic book source, because he traced it using a slide projector. In his total lack of originality, Warhol was, like Roy Lichtenstein, being totally original. With his scribbles and occasional drips, the painting also refers to, in fact, it parodies abstract expressionism, since there's no emotion to be seen here, no sincere emotion at least. Interestingly, when Warhol saw Lichtenstein's exhibition of comic book paintings at Leo Castelli the following year, he swore off comics forever. This ambitious young artist understood that the art world wasn't big enough for two comic book artists. Instead, Warhol gravitated toward his more natural, familiar world of advertising. 32 Campbell soup cans of 1962 happens to have been hand-painted, but the repeated panels with different names of soups were made to look commercially printed and impersonal, like actual labels. Soon, by the way, he would discover photographic-based silkscreening to eliminate the artist's touch entirely. Anyway, the cans speak of a world of plenty, which at the same time is a world of materialist conformity. John Copland, the founding editor of Artforum, said the cans, quote, can be read as a pun on people, how much alike they are, how all that changes is the name." Unquote. Warhol, for his part, had this to say. It's a long quote that starts by referring to Bertolt Brecht, the German communist playwright. Quote, "Someone said that Brecht wanted everybody to think alike. I want everybody to think alike. But Brecht wanted to do it through communism, in a way. Russia is doing it under government. It's happening here all by itself, without being under a strict government. So if it's working without trying, why can't it work without being communist? Everybody looks and acts alike, and we're getting more and more that way. I think everybody should be a machine. I think everybody should be like everybody." Unquote. By choosing to paint multiple soup cans, Warhol was imitating a previous artist who had painted two ordinary cans. Not soup, but beer. Warhol was inspired by painted bronze by Jasper Johns. But Warhol's paintings have no apparent artist's touch at all. True, the lineup of colors varies, but that feels industrial, not personal, as if the printing rollers didn't match up for the different runs through the press. In fact, that kind of printer's error was pretty much unheard of in the real commercial world of 1960s. Anyway, even if it looked like an old kind of era, it was still impersonal. With his knowledge of advertising, Warhol brought keen insights to his big torn Campbell soup can, Pepper Pot, from 1962. Really, the subject of the work is the paper-thin signage. Campbell's represents families, grandma's cupboard, days homesick from school, tradition, honesty, etc., etc., etc. But actually, all those associations are paper-thin. What's underneath is just a tin can. The painting underscores how amazingly strange it is, the way we get our food. Before the late 19th century, our ancestors had a direct relationship with their food, which they bought at a market or in bulk. But then, corporations started sticking their face between us and our food. Now there are dozens of companies that sell, for example, salt, each with their own labels and their own corporate meanings and identities that have virtually nothing to do with what's inside the box. If you think about it, there's something democratizing about Warhol's subjects, though, whether Campbell's soup or Coke, as you see here in green Coca-Cola bottles, also of 1962. Here's how Warhol put it, quote, "What's great about this country is that America started the tradition where the richest consumers buy essentially the same things as the poorest. You can be watching TV and see Coca-Cola, and you know that the president drinks Coca-Cola, Liz Taylor drinks Coca-Cola, and just think, you can drink Coca-Cola too. A Coke is a Coke, and no amount of money can get you a better Coke than the one the bum on the corner is drinking. All the Cokes are the same, and all the Cokes are good. Liz Taylor knows it, the president knows it, the bum knows it, and you know it." Unquote. That seems to be the subtext of Do-It-Yourself Seascape J from 1963, a paint-by-numbers work that suggests anyone could have painted it. It would look the same. But of course the flip side of this aspect of mass culture is the lack of individualism. That comes clear in another work from 1962, Dance Diagram Tango. The painting suggests that your body is like a marionette, following directives from the outside, just the same way that Warhol's portrait does. Warhol turned his attention to sculpture in 1964 when he created wooden boxes silk-screened with Brillo package design. It was a fair amount of effort to create something so ordinary, so artless, and uninteresting. And of course, its manufacture implied a total absence of creativity or originality. Like Duchamp did with his ready-mades, he found something out there in the world which he didn't change in the least, except to make it over with photographic silk screening. But more like Johns and his flags, etc., the thing Warhol found was the sign, the coded image from a visual language, rather than the actual thing itself. That was how he viewed his own self-portrait, as we've seen, and how he regarded other celebrities too, as coded images in a visual language created by the culture. Take Marilyn Monroe, for example, whose publicity photo, shallow and carefully constructed, is the source for Warhol's paintings. The message is simple. There is no human being Marilyn Monroe. Instead, she is a media concoction created by agents, producers, marketers. The owner of the body that plays Marilyn Monroe, Norma Jean Baker, has nothing really to do with Marilyn Monroe, who is just a sign. She's a sign that stands for whatever she stands for, depending when and where you see her. Before her suicide in 1962, she stood for glamour and sexiness. Then maybe she stood for tragedy. Now, the same image stands for nostalgia. Maybe it even stands for Andy Warhol. If Apple Computers recruits her image for an ad campaign, it'll mean computers. Really, it has no fixed meaning, no interior truth. That's something that pop art understood, that images could be taken from whatever context and put in any new context, and they would be free, floating signs, ready to adhere to any new meaning. Here's Warhol in 1964 in the studio, what he called the factory, which, with its aluminum foil-covered walls, looks here a little to me like the Batcave. He certainly doesn't look too busy. This was taken just a year before Warhol officially announced his retirement from painting, something that Duchamp had also done in 1923. By this time, the factory was in full swing. He had started it in late 1963, really as an emulation of capitalism. Like a CEO, Warhol directed only. He said all of his works were made by his assistants, and they could crank out dozens of paintings each day. Was it true he didn't participate? Well, no. It appears that Warhol was, in fact, quite hands-on as a boss, creating the designs and carefully supervising colors and those off-register effects. But he didn't want us to know it. In 1966, Warhol created the celebrity magazine Interview, and he started touring with the band Velvet Underground, along with the singer Nico, for whom he created the cover art for their first album, which you see here, a banana with directions next to a pull tab at the top right to, quote, peel slowly and see. Warhol continued making films of the sort he had started in 1963, films like Empire, which depicted the Empire State Building for 8 unedited hours. Frankly, it's not a very interesting film to watch through, but it's certainly Cagean in its openness. What's more, with such films, you can really, truly say that the artist is not there. It's just the camera rolling. There's just one more aspect of Warhol's art I feel I need to mention. Not the 1978 oxidation paintings, made by urinating on specially primed canvas, though that's interesting enough as a satire of Pollock's work, and even as an inspiration from Georges Bataille's surrealist ideas about abjection. No, the thing I want to talk about is trauma. Warhol created a series of paintings known as the Disasters. It started with a jet crash in 1962 that he read about in the paper, and that resulted in a painting. Other disasters included race riots, the Kennedy assassination, the electric chair, even the accidental poisoning of tuna in tuna fish cans. Warhol explained, quote, every time you turned on the radio they said something like 4 million are going to die. That started it. But when you see a gruesome picture over and over again, it really doesn't have any effect. Unquote. What Warhol does in Green Car Crash from 1963 is contradictory. On the one hand, he repeats the disturbing image over and over again, like on TV, till it really doesn't have any effect. But on the other hand, it does, because each repeat of the image is a little different, loaded with acrylic paint a little differently, so different details emerge in the different repeated images. In other words, the way it's painted compels a viewer to look and restores the horror. The scholar Hal Foster calls this approach traumatic realism. It's the side of Warhol's work that reveals his obsession with death.